Shall we start? I'm only being so punctual because at 8 o'clock we all turn into pumpkins and they roll us out the front door. So,
You'll need to get closer to the microphone.
Okay, thank you, Joe. How's that? Can you hear me? Cindy, can you hear me? So, welcome everyone to the Little Bangkok Sangha. Are these monthly events, the English? Weekly. Well, okay. So you're spoiled. Good. Well, I live officially in Nakhon Pathom, so I don't get in often. My name is Robin, and I have been sort of an affiliate of Little Bang since I arrived. Well, I came back to Thailand in 2008. Before that, I was here. Is there an echo? A slight echo? If there is, just let me know. There's a kind of techno beat that seems to be added to my voice here. And so yeah, before that I lived in Thailand as a monk from 1994 to 2003 roughly. And before that I was a monk in England, and that's where I met Pandit when he was still, well, I'm not allowed to tell you his lay name because he'd get upset with me. But he was an Anagarika, very British name that we don't have in America. I don't know why he objects to people knowing. But anyway, he was there as a Anagarika, which is like a white-robed novice, and we've been friends ever since. So we've known each other for more than 30 years, and I've always delighted in his good efforts, because I think this Little Bang is, as far as I know, the best English language medium live exchange of Dhamma in all of Bangkok. So it's had different venues. We've been at Banari now, it seems, I think for 3 or 4 years, maybe back here. So as is the custom, before giving a talk, I give a talk maybe 2 or 3 times a year at Little Bang, and they always ask me to give you a title of the talk with a little synopsis, which normally is not that hard, because my profession is I'm a translator of Dharma books from Thai into English. I'm now semi-retired, but still active, and I usually have some project that I'm elbow deep in and want to, just want to share. And it's quite easy. It's sort of like a recap of what I'm doing anyways. And this time, although I'm still working, and I'm not translating at the moment, I'm doing an editing job, I was telling Cindy, because she's a neighbor, those of you who know Cindy, we're both, we've got a little gang out in Salaya that we cause all kinds of mischief out there. So I was telling her that in some ways I'm cheating, because nothing came to mind that I really wanted to share with you as a theme. And so I chose, it was not arbitrary that I chose the theme, the power of myth, because the editing work that I'm doing, which is like a 3-4 year project, which will probably be drawn out into 5 or 6 years, is the Thai government is sponsoring, in honor of the king, an entire translation, retranslation of the Tripitaka from Pali into English. And there are about 16 translators from around the world, and then an editorial board, and then what's it called? Who's the editor that looks at all the grammar at the end? Good, thank you. Are you a copy editor? And so my Pali, is anyone here that doesn't know what Pali is? Okay, so it's the name of the language. I'm stuttering because originally it wasn't called Pali. It's a cousin to Sanskrit, but all of the texts in the Theravada or the Southern School, so the Buddhism you find in Thailand and Burma and Sri Lanka and Cambodia and Laos, was passed down orally at first for a few hundred years and then written down in a language that we now call Pali. And it was maybe at the time of the Buddha, I'm not sure if it had a name, it was very much the language of the common folk. I've often heard it referred to as Magadhan. So Magadha was one of the kingdoms, one of the largest kingdoms in India at the time. But as you probably know, the Buddha traveled extensively throughout the Indian subcontinent and somehow was able to communicate with people. So I think just like now, where I don't know how many languages there are in India, but I know you have Hindi is probably the chief one, then you have Urdu and others. And they're probably related, most of them are related. So it's maybe a little bit like someone going from Hamburg to Zurich and okay, I can communicate with these people, and or even go to Holland, a lot of familiar words. And so this language is how the Buddhist teachings, again, I say of our school, of this school, because there's also the Mahayana school, there's the Vajrayana, the Tibetan school. So often Buddhism is divided into these three lineages or families. And in the Theravada school, which literally means the word of the elders, is the language that it's been passed down in is Pali. And so if any of you, I assume most of you have been either to monasteries or to retreats and probably have heard the chanting that the monks do. In Thailand it's quite musical because the language has what do they call not tonal? It's tonal language. So if you go to, say, to the monastery in England, they've had to artificially put tones in to make it sound a little bit more bouncy, because otherwise it's just like yo, so, bhagawa, arahang. But in Thai it's yo, so, and like wow, and they didn't deliberately do that to make it sound, like the old monks in Europe probably had similar sort of quite beautiful chanting, but it's just the nature of the Thai language. So anyway, the project that's being done here is translating all, in Thailand I believe it's 45 volumes. So if you go into a monastery in Thailand, you'll see a bookcase, usually glass covered, of 45 very beautiful volumes that no one seems to open and read. Anyway, there's a lot of books in what we call the Tripitaka, which is literally the three baskets. So you have the suttas, or the sermons, and you have the Vinaya, which is the monastic code of conduct, and then you have the Abhidhamma, which is more, say, it doesn't refer to individuals or to places. It's very much like, let's examine all the constituents of the mind. I would say it's nitty-gritty. Sometimes they call it Buddhist psychology, although I don't think literally means higher dharma. I don't think there's any really one good translation for it. But anyway, that's one of the three baskets. The Abhidhamma was probably compiled maybe 200 or 300 years after the Buddha died and then incorporated in that. Now we have the Tripitaka, or in Pali it's Tipitaka. So Sanskrit and, as I said, Sanskrit and Pali are very closely related. And in English, we use a lot of Sanskritized words, like the word karma, whereas in Pali, it's kamma. So in Thai, it's gam. And gam comes from gamma because they pronounce their K's more like G's, and that's a whole nother topic. But anyway, so dharma in Pali is dhamma, so that's why in Thai it's pratam, tamma. So these are just some very basic examples. And what's interesting, has always been fascinating to me, is that both Sanskrit and Pali are Indo-European languages. So they have both the grammatical structure and a lot of, I don't know if the word, I don't know what the word cognate actually means. It's a nice word. Someone can tell me later. But basically, root words that are shared. And so, it's like when I grew up in the States, in the US, and I came across Buddhism when I was about 16, Asian religion. Oh, wow. You know, a whole new world. But it seemed so far away. I remember I was a stamp collector, and I had stamps of Thailand with elephants. I thought, wow. In fact, in my 7th grade yearbook, when they said, what do you want to do with your life? I somehow wrote, I want to go to Southeast Asia. I don't know why I wrote that, but here I am. And anyway, so that's really exciting. My love of language came a bit later in life, maybe in my 20s. It's not like I went to university and studied linguistics, but now I have a real passion for language, just partly because without language we're lost. You might know this story. I wish I had the title and the author, but I think I read the book, and it's a real life story of a man who he was maybe a paranoid schizophrenic. He had a daughter. He locked her up in a room, and he didn't want her to have any contact. He wanted to protect her from any danger. So he had a compassionate, impulse, but it was disastrous. He wouldn't even talk to her. So this went on for years, 7, 8, 9 years or something before she was discovered. I think she heard a dog barking. So she never, even though she was later, you could say, rescued and they tried everything to try and help her in development, what that case and other obviously you can't really test this on people deliberately, but that without language, our brains don't develop properly. Like circuitry just doesn't get made that we need for survival. So that's a sort of an extreme example, but I just, the way, I think it's, have you ever heard of Chuang Tzu? He's like a legendary poet before Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. And, there's lovely stories. Like, his wife dies, and he's singing in the bathtub. And one of his friends kind of like, how can you be singing in the bathtub? Your wife's just died. And he's like, everything's impermanent. It's just like, this is just nature. Why not sing? I mean, if you... anyway, that's one story. But another story where he talks about that language, it's like when you take liquid. So you have milk, and you kind of squeeze it out of the cow's udder, and you put it into a pitcher, and then you put it into your tea. You're just taking the milk and putting it in different vessels, but the milk is really what's essential for our well-being, for our nutrition. And so the same with words, that words are just the vessels for meaning. And I find that very exciting. That's why... well, I didn't, in a sense, choose to be a translator because when I disrobed, I had no college degree. I had no immediate job offers. I was about 46 years old, 44. And it just happened to be that I started translating as a monk. And so a woman in Thailand who knew my work that I had done invited me back, and that gave me a profession. But it's like a dream job for me. I just love doing this, and So anyway, this is the project. I'm on the editorial board, and I'm doing the one volume that is called was actually 2 volumes of the 45, and it's called the Jatakas. Anybody here not know what the Jataka tales are? Okay, so it's the previous life stories of the Buddha, and there are 547 previous life stories, and they're legends. They're like fairy tales. A lot of them are like Aesop's fables. The animals are talking. The king brings in, why is this golden deer sacrificing his life for this doe and her fawn? And the doe starts teaching the king. It's that kind of storytelling. And there's a beautiful 3-set translation. We normally think of the Jatakas as the stories, as these, as I say, these, in a sense, these legends. But actually in the Tripitaka, there are just verses from the stories. And the stories were apparently added later to sort of fill out the meaning of the verses. And there's 6,000 verses, which I only found out yesterday. I thought there were only going to be 500, so I have a lot more work to do than I signed on for. But anyway, it's a great job, and it's fun, and so far there's not much pressure. But that's why I chose this theme, because if any of you like fairy tales, or you have children and you just don't know how you're going to explain Buddhism to them, there's the 4 Noble Truths, life is bound up with suffering. I mean, it's very hard. There's the Eightfold Path, and then the kid's like, let me out of here. Give me my iPhone and let me watch TikTok for a while. So, this is a problem we have today anyways, that people aren't really reading anymore. And people are using these digital devices as babysitters for young children, and they're already getting hooked on these. I have a lot to say about that too, but again, there's a lot of tangents I could go on, but I'm trying to steer my way through this theme here, and this thread. And so if you do have children, there's a beautiful 3-volume set that's published by the Pali Text Society, which is has been around for about 150 years. The British, partly because they had colonies, but it wasn't just for economic reasons. A lot of them, they had this, for some reason, this real rich tradition of scholarship. They did the French and the Germans too, but I think the English were outstanding in this. And so they'd often go places, like say to India, and they actually discovered a lot of the archaeological sites, the ancient Buddhist sites. It was the British, not the Indians. You think, well, why didn't the Indians uncover these what's now Bodh Gaya? It was this big stupa that was covered in vines and had sort of little Hindu temples around it. Nobody knew what it was, and then it was a British archaeologist who realized this is actually where Gautama Buddha was enlightened, and it used to be near the Neranjana River, which is now like 6 kilometers away, so things have changed. But anyway, so the Jataka tales, so there's the Pali Text Society. If any of you, in fact, I have a friend who's from Singapore, but they're Singaporeans, as you know, probably know, they're quite multilingual, and the English is very much, they're very strong in English. And he has 3 daughters, and the eldest one, while she was an infant, I guess his wife said, look, I forget her name, the 3 daughters are all sweet. I think it's Chi, Si, and another one. Anyway, they all rhyme. And the oldest one would maybe be crying, okay, you go and it's your turn. And he just sit there and read the Jataka tales to her. And now she loves reading, and she's now about, 15, 16. She's going to a good school in England. And just, this is an example, I think, when we instill that curiosity, and I think partly it has to do with storytelling. From very early on, it really awakens beautiful qualities in people from early on. So the Jataka tales are the only, apart from there's the Dhammapada, which is very much similar to the Tao Te Ching, which are sort of verses of wise sayings by the Buddha. It's a book, not a big book. And they don't need stories, because it's like if you do good, basically goodness will follow you, like your shadow follows you as you walk out. And if you do bad, bad things will follow you, just like an ox cart and the tracks that run behind it. They go hand in hand. So these kind of sayings, they don't require stories, but there are Dhammapada stories that are sometimes seem completely irrelevant to the verse, but beautiful too. So that's another book that is recommended. Anyway, so I'm an editor of these stories, and I've done 100, and I thought I was only going to have to do 547, but now I have to do 6,600 and something. Anyway, one day at a time. And I'm actually waiting for the translator, who's Spanish, to send me more work. So I have a little pause. So that gives you, that's the background behind why I chose this this theme for tonight. Now, normally, I like to leave some time for questions, and I'm usually, for some reason, I'm not a really kind of, don't think of myself as a very talkative person, but for some reason you put me up here in front of a microphone, and you're a captive audience, I'm afraid. I just go on forever. Sometimes an hour goes by, seems like 10 minutes to me, and so I apologize for that. But I do want to, I would like us to have some time for more of an exchange. I have tried doing meditation, like formal meditation at these events, and it somehow, it didn't work for me anyway, because I don't know. Is there anyone here who has never meditated before? Okay, so you all know what the experience is, or what what the handbooks say, and it's very much going inward. It's an inward journey, and that's well and good, and I think is essential. But sometimes, it's actually not easy to change gears. Okay, you go in and boom, ring the bell. Okay, now we go out. And if any of you have done retreats, it's even more, say, pronounced that it takes a while sort of reorientating yourself to the world, because the world is there's all these sense impressions, people talking, things to do, things to plan, whereas on a retreat it's quite simple. And so I won't be doing that today. I don't suggest that we do a formal meditation. There are opportunities for that Prat Pandit or Little Bangkok, the committee members can point you in the right direction if you want to do that. In Thailand, or really around the world now, Buddhism has become quite a more and more popular. So, yeah, before I go back to this theme of stories and myths, I just, for me, it's amazing that we're all here. That we're all sitting here, for me, is, we're these, look at these complex organisms. We have these limbs, we have all this strange anatomy, we have all these, we have digestive systems and respiratory systems and nervous systems, all contained within this little, it's not that little, but it's pretty amazing. And then we have consciousness. And doesn't that just kind of blow your mind? I mean, it's just so remarkable. And it's also remarkable that here we are in the city of, what, 14 million people, or whatever it is, and you've all chosen to come here on a, what is it, tonight, a Monday night. And I just want to say, you know, I feel, yeah, I feel it's, I guess it's a form of gratitude, it's a form of just appreciation that you've come and that we can share this space. Because, you know, what are the alternatives? There's a lot of things that one can do to distract oneself. And this is not, I wouldn't call this a distraction. Not many people come to Little Bang to get distracted. Because it's not, you know, it's pretty kind of bare bones. So you're here because you have an inquisitive mind. You want to learn more about how to navigate through life. Anyway, that's enough said on that subject. But I was just thinking of that coming in today, that it's very worthwhile to come. And so back to the theme of myth. So yeah, I've created a little some notes just to remind. When we think of myths or fables or legends, then we usually think of fiction, of make-believe, of fantasy. But I would argue that there's quite a gray line between fact and fiction in terms of not so much as what is true and untrue, or what exists and what is solely in our imagination, but more the power that whether it's they both follow a narrative. They're both a story. And in fact, this word narrative is used a lot nowadays. It's a strange time to be alive, and there's seems to be more political upheaval, and also the way information is being shared is somehow challenging us as human beings. And so we have, but this word narrative has been used for, you know, it's an English word that has been used for centuries, and I think it's an important word, that there's that is connected to this idea of stories and language. And so the way, in that little blurb I wrote about what we're going to explore tonight is how are the stories that we tell ourselves, how do they shape our lives? And I'd like to blur the line now between fact and fiction, because I think they both can have a very powerful effect. Just like my mother's German, and she always wants to speak German with me, which is kind of challenging, because I spoke it as a little child, but I'm not fluent. But for her sake, I want, it makes her so happy. So I listen to these recordings in my car. You know the Grimm's fairy tales, the Grimm's Märchen? They're quite powerful too. And those kind of stories, at least for me, I'm a bit of a softie. I'm a kind of, I can weep at movies and things. I get emotionally quite easily involved in stories. And so if there's a hero or a heroic deed, I'm very moved. And these stories are very much about that, of overcoming difficulty, of meeting good and evil, and somehow either ending up in the stomach of a wolf or being ground up, if you're a bad boy and girl, and made into pretzels or something like that. I mean, they're quite scary stories sometimes, but they're symbolic. And at the moment, my cousin sent me a book. Do any of you know Gabor Mate? He's he's an academic, but he must be trained as a psychiatrist, because it's a book on ADD, or attention deficit disorder, which is a fairly common disruption for people in today's society, maybe always. And in that book, he talks about. I imagine I've heard this before, but he says words are symbols, and that's exactly how I would see it. Just like I was saying earlier, that they're vessels of meaning, they're also symbols. And so whether it's factual or fictional, the words are symbolic, and the stories, the narratives that we tell are powerful. They do. In fact, we really can't make sense of the world at first without language. Now, you can argue, especially as a Buddhist, as wisdom develops, new kinds of knowledge and insight arise that are not reliant on theory, on thought, on conceptualizing, on abstract thinking, but there's there are forms of knowledge that are more immediate, that don't require sort of this next level of, oh, right, things are impermanent. There's just boom. And you could say that's what awakening is this, you pull the veil of delusion and you see clearly. So the word in Pali for belief is, it's usually translated as view, but it's very much at the heart of this theme that I'm talking about tonight, is ditthi. And ditthi comes from a Pali Sanskrit word which means to see. So you have dasana and what's another one? I forget the other Sanskrit word, but ditthi basically means right seeing, and yet it's pointing to the way we frame its. We use language at first to set perimeters and to try and make sense of the world, and also to guide, to make decisions and how we should live and how we shouldn't live. That's very much based in language as well. And so whether you're talking about just legalistic of laws, but also of every religion has sort of ethical codes of conduct that are outlined. So I grew up in a Protestant family, roughly, and so I learned about, say, the Ten Commandments. So you have these outlined in language, thou shalt not, and these are powerful messages. And so if one says it's a devout Christian, I know a few, that is the guide that they used to help. How should I live my life? What is an ethical, a moral, a skillful way of conducting myself? And in Buddhism, we have the same. So you'll all be familiar, I think everyone here will have heard of the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so is that true? Anyone never heard of the Eightfold Path? Okay, that's fine. Good. Thank you for raising your hands. So you could say the Buddhist teachings, that maybe the two teachings that are most well known are the Four Noble Truths. So the first, that every person's life has some form of pain or difficulty or suffering. That whether it's just a toothache on a physical level, but the Buddha is usually pointing to more like mental dilemmas of challenges that we have in the mind. So this word is usually, dukkha is usually translated in this context as suffering. And then he talked about like a doctor, he said there's a disease. In a sense, we all born with this disease. No one is, even the Buddha himself was not born enlightened, and so was confused. Confusion is a form of suffering, and doubt and uncertainty and fear. These are all variations on this theme. And then then he said, well, there's a cause for this. it's not just random. It's not out of the blue. And he, in this teaching of the Four Noble Truths, he talks about craving. So we have this craving for, say, for sensual pleasure. We have this craving to become, to be someone important, or to be someone who somehow is this craving for what's becoming, or this existence. But it can be existing as an identity of some form. And then when things go bad, which really bad, then there's this craving for extinction. So as an extreme, that's a sort of suicidal impulse, but it can come up, I just don't want to be in this state of mind. I'll do anything. Give me a big pint of beer. Feeling so much better now. Because it's what's an analgesic. The pain, a lot of the pain does subside. Not for everyone. And I'm not recommending it. I'm just giving you an example of, people, or whatever, many, many different forms of distractions that we have where we're not necessarily really participating or engaging with the activity out of this real true love or passion. It's more to do with trying to escape something else, to try and replace something inside, some disquiet, or loneliness, or whatever, anxiety. We just, I don't want to be with that. So we try and replace it. So that's the second. Then the third noble truth is it's possible. Everyone has the potential to be completely free from suffering. Now that's a radical, wild statement that would be, a lot of people would say is crazy. A lot of psychiatrists say it's crazy. All you can do is basically be well-adjusted. That's the kind of benchmark, but you'll never, it's even hubris to think that you can be completely free from suffering. So there you have it. That's, I'm not trying to argue one point or another. The Buddhism says to inquire, look into, doubt. Doubt is actually healthy to a certain degree. Don't just believe. Don't even believe the Buddha. Find out for yourself. And the fourth noble truth is this, there's a way to arrive at this liberation, this freedom from suffering. And that is the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is the fourth of these four noble truths. And so this Eightfold Path, again, the Western mind, from my experience, and the Thai mind, in many ways, is quite different. Even the way knowledge is passed down is very different, and the way people, it's fascinating. I think, more should be done to to inquire about how people can be, I think there's a lot of healthy interpollination between the West and the East. So the Thais, from my experience, are generally very laid back, very kind of sabai, chew, which comes from the English word chill. And so, and a lot of it has to do with, again, we're talking about stories and narratives. For them, basically, not the newer generation, but if you're talking about the older generation, I'd say 97% of people, if you said, is rebirth, is that kind of the fabric of the universe, is that we die and then are reborn? Oh yeah, of course. I mean, what else? And so I think that partly contributes to this sabai. It's like, well, what can I do? And I'll have another chance anyways, And so what's the rush? Why get all worked up when, I have, this is kind of what I've inherited. I'm only this smart. And that can be taken to an extreme, of course. And so the Westerner comes to Thailand, like myself. I'm half sort of Germanic, Swiss. I want to get things orderly, and I want things to get things done. And I want there to be discipline. So I can get quite worked up about achieving my goals. guys look at me. I remember when I was on, there's a lot of them just smile, just let him kind of bang his head against the door that's locked, For them, if the door's locked, just sit down and kind of like have some steamed vegetables with some chili sauce. That's not bad, actually. You can smile, laugh. If you have some oranges, share them with the person next to you. And then meanwhile, the Westerner is like, I gotta get through this door. I don't have a key. It's locked. It's hard. But somehow banging my forehead shows that I'm really sincere, like I mean business. So this is an example of this. And I think this, again, that has its benefits because there's a sort of intensity and drive that's sometimes needed in life, but it can also be really futile and really painful and cause a lot of problems for oneself and others. So the Noble Eightfold Path, I don't see as linear. I brought this up, this cultural difference, partly because part of the intensity of the goal-oriented style of, say, education that we receive in the West, or what I've been corrected is more like Western Europe, is goal-oriented and linear. We like, how do I meditate? Well, just focus on your nose, and then you'll have a nimitta arise, and then the jhanas, you attain the jhanas, and once you got the jhanas, then you're basically kind of like the coast is clear. It's all kind of you'll apply your insight that you've developed, and you'll get enlightened, and then so that there's this. It sounds exaggerated, but I think from my experience living, I lived in the monastery for 20 years, and so 8 years in Thailand, 12 years in England, and I saw both, and a lot of the Western monks, I think what's often most painful is when we see attributes in other people that we have in ourselves that we don't like. So I'm actually, I've been told I'm quite a sort of frightening person. I remember one of the other monks, he couldn't even go to the bathroom if I was in the same vicinity. His bowels wouldn't move because he was I made him so uptight because I had this sort of, okay, let's do it into the fray. Let's, get nirvana or bust, sort of. And so, I was carrying the banner for and that, okay, like I said, I knew part of the characteristic of moha or delusion is that we have blinkers. And so often it requires someone else to tell us our shortcomings because we don't see them. So imagine you have a horse, you don't want it to be spooked, so you put blinkers and it runs forward, but there could be a grizzly bear right next to it, and it's like it doesn't even know, and it should know. And so that's what, good friends, good teachers, they say, well, actually, there's a grizzly bear next to you, better to get out of the way. And so we cause ourselves a lot of problems just because we have this confusion. We don't actually see things clearly, and this goes back to ditthi. So this is why, rather than, I would encourage anyone, rather than think of the Eightfold Path as this linear, you start at factor number 1, and then you end up at factor number 8, more as a circle, or even better said, more like a helix. You start, you develop really all of them in unison, but you can think of it to some extent as a linear progression, but you come back to where you were when you started, but at a slightly more elevated point, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, go to M. Quartier. They have a helix over there. and you can walk up and get the idea. And so, but then you do have, okay, you have a list of 1 to 8, and it starts with right view, sammaditthi. Samma is complete or correct, skillful, but really complete in the sense of its, when these 8 factors are complete, then something marvelous. That's how transformation occurs. But they all 8 of them have to sort of be perfectly aligned and fulfilled for that to happen. And to do that, that is the path. That's why it's called Magga, the path. It is a spiritual journey for those who want to embark on it. It's not, Buddhism, we don't go around knocking on people's door, have you heard the good word? Get down to it, come and, again, I have my issues with Christianity going back from when I was a boy, and this is what I've learned from very early on is that faith is where we trust a teacher or a tradition, and some people won't have any faith in, say, a religious tradition. They'll have maybe faith in their people that they know, they respect, but in Buddhism, faith, you could say, goes hand in hand with where do you start? Where do you start? Where does a person start? And so if you think about the different ways in which you can start on this path, one is actually suffering, is where we're suffering and we're like, damn, why the heck am I suffering? I grew up, I had some difficult childhood events, but basically pretty well coddled, upper middle class, sort of traveling around, food, never went hungry, always clothed, never was physically abused or even really verbally abused, not to anything to really remark on, and yet I was so confused. And I knew I was confused. Like I somehow had this reflective ability, and maybe not everyone does have this, but by 12, I was already like, okay, so there's a God, okay? Because my mother remarried, and my stepdad's a theologian, so we started going to church. And, when I look at some of the Baptist churches where they're like, singing, and they even have guitars, maybe I'd be a Christian today. I don't know. We were in a very Protestant, and everyone's sitting there, quite somber, everyone being polite. Definitely not my thing. I was this rebellious, soon-to-be rebellious teenager. But at that time, I was at least inquisitive. I wanted to know, what is this story? This story that there's a God that created all of this, that created me, that has control over everything. So then I started praying for a couple years, I guess. Maybe it was a few months, over a period of 2 years. And felt I got no answer. But I knew I was suffering. And then I turned to drugs, marijuana, and of course, rock and roll. I got into the Aerosmith and the Doors. And this was like, I was only 14. And that was, I didn't have helicopter parents. Like my mother was like, if you know Calvin and Hobbes, she was like, out the back door with you. I'll see you this evening. Just go out and play with your friends. And that was life, and it was good actually. I learned a lot. And we were out in the woods. It wasn't kind of urban chaos. But I knew something wasn't right inwardly. So people can start with suffering, and that just brings up the question, like, why? Why am I unhappy? And sometimes it's clear. Sometimes we really are, people do struggle, whether it's through physical illness or financial difficulties or just living with people who are abusive or something, then it's quite clear why we're suffering. But sometimes we really can't. It just seems to be, there's this, again, this disquiet, this unsettledness in our hearts, and that could be the doorway through, by making that inquiry. But then when like I said, I came across Buddhism when I was 16, and it was a game changer. Like all of a sudden, I had a new narrative, because I had a kind of, excuse if there are any Christians out there, I'd kind of abandoned God. I was like, okay, I just can't buy it. That's all. I just can't buy it. It just doesn't work for me. And then, first it was just Asian religion, there was Taoism, and then there was Hinduism, and who's that great Chinese philosopher? Confucianism. So it was just like this great bouquet of all this. But it wasn't very God-oriented. I mean, of course, in Hinduism, there's a real amazing pantheon, but there is also a strong meditative tradition in Hinduism. And of course, in Buddhism, although there are gods, they don't play a very important role. There isn't this sort of entreaty, please come and help me, at least not in the you could say the heartwood of the teachings. And so that then, when I came across Buddhism, then I was interested. I thought, okay, this makes sense. Like even looking at a Buddha Rupa, very serene, little smile, like, what does he know? I mean, he knows something. He knows something, and I want to know what he knows. That was the kind of feeling I had. And so that was where faith then came in. It's like, okay, I don't know if even today, I don't know if nirvana is actually real. I'm not yet enlightened. But I think this is a simile in the suttas, in the scriptures, of this like a little chick in an egg. You got wings already, you got feathers, you have feet, and you have a beak, and yet you're kind of like in this little, and you kind of see a bit of light through the egg, it's a little bit translucent, and that little chick has senses that there's something out there that's worth. And what does it do? It kind of peck, and opens a hole and goes, wow. Why does it do it? Because, you could say, okay, that's purely instinct. But that's an analogy that's used of the spiritual seeker. I would even venture to say everyone in this room has that both that intuition and impulse. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be here. There are too many other fun things to do. And yet you're here. This is why I think it's remarkable, and I'm so glad you came. So the Eightfold Path starts with, I'll just list them quickly: right view, right thought, right, speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Okay. Now I won't go into a lot of Pali tonight, a little bit, because I think it's always good to introduce Pali. Again, I said there's like amazing similarities. Like why in English do we say cow? And in Germany they say ku. And in India they say go. And in Thailand they say ko, like korat is a cow. It's all the same word, because 4,000 years ago, we were basically had the same ancestors, and we were kind of nomads, or just like pastures, and hadn't really started to build cities yet. And then we kind of, okay, this tribe, okay, I'm going to go east for a while. Oh yeah, I'm going to go west, maybe catch up with you in about 4,000 years. But these language, like the word if you know, like the word gift in like a formal word in Thai, haitan, and that comes from a Pali word dana, or generosity, which can also mean generosity. So that the French word donner, to give, it's the same word. And I find that magical, because that means the world is, in a sense, is much smaller than we think it is. We share a lot of common ancestry through language. So anyway, so I think it's good to introduce, and there's some Pali terms like the word dukkha. I said it's in this context it's translated as suffering. In other contexts, suffering is really not a good word for it. And so there's some words, Pali words, that I don't think can be translated. And then it's learn this word. Now for the Thais, they have this advantage. So the Thais, they take from the Indian, like I imagine something like 50% of Thai is actually from Indian languages, Sanskrit and Pali. And then they take the word, and like I said, the vowels stay the same, but the consonants differ slightly, so D's become T's, and so instead of Buddha, they say Putta, so that's a P, but very similar. It's a consonant, slight alteration. And then the Thais, they love abbreviating. I think it's part of this Thai, why say 2 syllables when you can say 1? You know, so just chill. Keep things easy. So instead of dukkha or tukka, it's tuk. So anyone who's learned Thai, kwam tuk is suffering. Every Thai person knows this word. So you don't have to actually teach them a lot of Pali. Some of the words, the meanings have changed, and then it's good. Some words they don't know in their everyday language, but so many are part of their everyday language. You hear from day one. So it sounds like a word like tuk. Okay, but if I said dukkha to you, I imagine probably more than half the people in this room are like, dukkha? What is dukkha? I had never heard that word, or remind me what that means. So anyway. So this Eightfold Path starts with right view. And why does it start with right view? If it's a circular, you could say it's like a progression. Why not start with right mindfulness or right action? Because, so these 8, again, I'm going to stop soon because I want to open the floor for questions, but I just want to give you add a few little more points to tonight's talk. So these eight factors can be put into 3 groups, and the first 2 are called the wisdom factors. So they do have to do more with, here wisdom has to do with, again, to begin with a more cerebral cognitive process. Eventually it becomes intuitive, and you could say is a form of knowledge and understanding that does not require language. It's just a pure knowing, but it starts with language. So that is because the power, again, of narrative. If we don't have a good narrative, we're going to believe things, we're going to be told things, we're going to adopt certain ideas and beliefs that are going to lead us in the wrong direction. It doesn't mean bad. Like something like secularism. You know, that's a fairly innocuous idea. Okay, basically there are no gods, there's no other realms of existence. When you die, it's lights out, you know, it's oblivion, whatever. It's just material things. In fact, consciousness is apparently, according to some people, just an emanation of matter. So there really isn't mind. It's just a trick. It's just matter, what reflecting, it's thinking. I don't know what it's doing. But anyway, it's not a theory I hold to, but it's an example. But you could see here that the Buddha outlined this Eightfold Path beginning with right view, and I don't think that's coincidental. When it comes down to brass tacks and practice, so anyway, go back to the grouping. The first 2 are wisdom factors. The next 3 are ethical, sometimes described as to do with moral conduct. I don't use the word moral much because it's kind of acquired. A lot of people don't like the word because of partly through just religions, organized religions have done a lot of really unskillful and even cruel things over the centuries. A lot of people are disillusioned with religion, and morality has this feeling of, oh, you just should. And why should I? And so, but it's okay. Ethical is a little, I think, works more. I usually say virtuous, virtuous conduct. That has, for me, a very beautiful and not non-corrupted meaning or connotation for people. And then, so that's right speech, right action. So like, don't kill other sentient beings, don't steal, basic things to start with. Don't lie, and then right livelihood. So everyone has to earn a living. Even a child has the right livelihood of going to school. Even a monk has a right livelihood of observing the discipline well and being, living in a life of integrity within that model, within that structure, and that's their livelihood. And then so these are the three factors of virtuous conduct. And then the last three of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, they're often called jitta factors. And this gets a little complicated because jitta is usually just translated as mind, sometimes as heart. But then you think, well, wisdom and cognition is also mind. So what's going on? But if you think of it more of like wisdom, again, to begin with, is more like how we would describe cognitive and cerebral and first abstract, a little bit more analytical, and then the last three you could say are more emotional. Is one way that is to describe this. It has more to do with, like, if you ask a Thai person, like, where's your jit? I think most Thais would say, oh, yeah, it's somewhere around here. But if you ask a lot of Westerners, where's your mind? It's up here. It's like headquarters, cockpit, all the machinery, the computers are up here. Without a brain, then you can't do anything. But that's an interesting example. I think mind, heart, at the end of the day, again, it's all has to be in balance, and so. But it's one of the challenges of language and of translation is how do you translate jitta? Anyway, so these three factors, they're all the third one, concentration, in the Pali word is samadhi, and interestingly enough, that grouping of three is sometimes called the three samadhi factors. So samadhi means literally means to compose, to be collected and composed. So it's not just concentration where you're focusing on a candle flame or your breath and shutting every other sense input or sensory input out and focusing on one object. It's not just that. Mindfulness, of course, is the awareness from moment to moment with all our six senses, to be able to have that fluidity and flexibility. And then right effort is balance. Again, the analogy that's used is like playing a lute. If the strings are too loose, then it sounds bad. It doesn't sound good. And if they're too tight, they'll snap. So there's a sense of in our lives finding a right balance in our effort, so being relaxed at times and being intense at times. I mean, finding the right time to have the right degree of energy. Okay, so these three, the first two, wisdom, second two, virtuous conduct, and the third, and then the third three, the last three of the mind, of jitta factors, samadhi factors. Now, when it comes down to practice, the Buddha uses very often this, again, a linear procession of sila, samadhi, panya. So he starts then with virtuous conduct, and then samadhi, which is the concentration, the meditation, you could say, and then the panya, the wisdom. So once you focus, once you see clearly, you're able to discern. Oh, right, my mind is composed. Then you have an insight. You see, oh, right, everything is impermanent. Everything is, in a sense, subject to, just like in physics, everything is subject to pressure. All the atoms want to kind of go their own way. There's a temporary cooperation, but they all kind of like, there's a tension there. And so, and then not self is the other of the three characteristics. So, yeah. Okay, I've got to stop because I want to open the floor. If for some reason you don't have any questions, I'll return because I unfortunately, again, I'm a rambling man. I ramble. And I was born a rambling man on the back seat of a Greyhound bus. I wanted to, there is this description of mundane right view, going back to Samaditi, and there are these 6 factors, which I would say is a template for how to start. But we don't have time. If they invite me back again, and I'm still welcome, maybe I'll make it a part 2. But like I said, it's really important for me to open the floor up to questions, and if any of you have anything you want to share or ask. Joe.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about Buddhist mythology because in the West we all grew up with, these stories that we were expected to believe in. There was a talking snake in this garden with Adam and Eve, and they ate the apple, blah, blah, blah. And we were expected to believe this, and I'm sure many people still do, and that Jesus was born even though his mother was a virgin and he could walk on water. Christians mostly will still believe that. But the only Buddhist mythology I'm familiar with is the story that when the Buddha was born, he could already walk and talk, and he walked around, and lotus flowers grew out of the ground with each step, and he pointed one hand up and one hand down and said, "Between heaven and earth, I am the most special one," something like that. And my question is, do Buddhists grow up with this and really believe in this? Do they really believe that the Buddha could walk and talk? Are we expected to believe that? Or is it, because I know that there are some mythologists that I studied mythology with in the West who said that in mythology there's always some kind of clue, very often near the beginning, to tell you this is a story. You don't really believe that there was a talking snake, do you? So this is mythology. Oh, it's not possible to have a baby without having sex. So this is telling us, okay, this is a story. It's mythology to make Jesus, into a god, and so on. But the story about the Buddha, having all of this, special powers when he was born, are we expected to think that this is true? Do Buddhists who are born as Buddhists believe in this? Or is this something we're supposed to say, oh, it's just a, story to say that the Buddha was special, but it's not really true?
Yeah, good question. I could. It's a topic that we could discuss for a lengthy period. There's a lot there. I think to try and keep it short and concise, I would say that, again, I think there is a blurred line between fact and fiction. I don't think we have to always know, like you were saying, there's a clue. Well, what is the clue? Can you tell me what the clue is? When do the mythologists say, well, actually, I'm only telling a myth? Usually they just start their story, A long time ago, there was a castle. And anyway, I'm just saying that I think that's part of the being able to find a balance between grabbing onto holding to firmly to narratives and being open to mystery. I think there's something to that is important here, that we don't have to know, actually. We don't have to know. Like, even there is, I mean, there's a lot more mythological stories than the Buddha walking immediately after he was born 7 steps, and then saying, I am basically, I'm destined to be the Buddha, or however the story goes. It's I mean, that's fantastical, isn't it? I mean, for me, if you ask me, do I believe it? I don't believe it or disbelieve it. I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I don't even know if the Buddha existed. I think there's a range. There's like a field of, or a range of, where it's helpful to begin. And this is the whole nature, again, of faith. We don't have faith in things that we know. We have faith in things that we don't know. But there's a sense that, say, a person or a tradition holds something valuable that can benefit us. And so, okay, I'll go along with this story. So in those 6 factors that are listed, it's a little bit difficult, actually, the scriptural reference. If I were to read it out, it would seem unusual. And I kind of summarized each of these 6. But one is, say, the power of generosity. That's basic. I think none of us here are going to dispute that being generous is a good thing. The power, the law of karma. There, I think most of us would agree. If you live a good life, if you're kind and patient, whatnot, your good things are going to come back. There's a ripple effect. Okay, not everyone will agree with that, but that's kind of already going out a bit on the limb. The next one, if I'm not mistaken, is about there is this world, and there's this world and the next world. That already a lot of Buddhists have problem with, not let alone non-Buddhists. Like, there is rebirth. That's, for many people, that is fantastical. That is just, beyond comprehension or belief. And some people will even get quite worked up about it and quite sort of unhappy about that idea. Like, no, it's just not real. It's not real. It's not how reality works. And so even there, again, it's not so much. Yes, stories we tell are essential, but the way we hold those stories is also essential. Because if I personally believe the Buddha was the greatest person to appear ever in this kind of latest rotation of in Buddhism, even this, and this is fantastic. How can you have an eon that, you have like 3 Buddhas appear, or 5 Buddhas, whatever. And these are all kind of stories that border on myth. But if in the last 10,000 years, if you ask me, the Buddha is the greatest. But I'm not going to go and kind of clobber a Muslim over the head, or a Jew, or a Jewish person, or a Christian, or whatever, because, you're not a Buddhist. You should be a Buddhist. Buddhists are the greatest. Why are you being so stubborn and believing in this other religious tradition or whatever? That would be really foolish, in my opinion. Like, there's a certain amount of, like, keep my opinion, my ditty, to myself. That's just healthy. Keep it private at first, because at first, I can't even prove to you that the Buddha was a historical figure. I mean, there's all kinds of evidence that point to that, but I have no definitive proof. There's no photograph. There is no, I think the written word at that time was rare, and so we're sort of already basing an entire religion on an oral transmission. You could say that's very shaky ground. And yet for me, it holds together so well. It's so, it's amazing if you really go into, say, the Tripitaka and even the commentaries, just how little dissonance there is, or discordancy, contradiction. Anyway, that's just my opinion, though. And so, to answer your question, there's many, many, many more Buddhist myths that, if I mean, you've lived in Thailand long enough. I'm sure you're playing a little bit innocent here. I'm sure you know. there are myths galore. And the Thai people have a lot of, Thailand originally was an animist culture before Buddhism came. And a lot of those animist traditions were kind of woven into Buddhism. So you have these spirit houses, and you can say, okay, yeah, well, there's devas. There's devas that occupy trees, and there are devas that occupy plots of land, and then there are devas in these different heaven realms. For the Thais, that is just, for most Thais, yeah, I mean, that's just how it is, it's like, it's a no-brainer. But they don't, but they I mean, for me, I think, I mean, there's a lot of superstition in every culture. It's not, and Thailand is not an exception to that. And I think that's what I would say is the danger, is where the attachment to the myth becomes superstition. If it's just telling your child a story about a donkey talking to a lion or something, then you could object, why are you telling this child? It's like talking to them about Santa Claus or something. It's like, it's not real. Why? But the power of, if you see the positive side, that these stories are vessels for, they have morals behind them. There's like if there's no clue at the beginning, there's usually a moral at the end that says, this is to help, oh, right, I shouldn't beat up my little sister. It's like okay, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, just to sort of follow up on that, like there was this discussion about having sort of, yeah, just to follow up on the discussion about, I guess, like the truth value of these stories and whether sort of there are hints in the stories one way or another. So it just reminded me of something you said earlier about the Chipaitas, where there's lots of, say, like talking animals and so forth. So
Yeah.
I mean, personally, when I read a story and there's a talking animal, to me that's sort of like a clue that it's not meant to be taken literally. That animals don't usually speak, to the best of my knowledge. So it's.
I don't know. Ask Cindy. She talks to her cats. Yes, they do. I talked to a cat the other night. This cat next door named Tiger. He looks a bit autistic. He kind of like, but not a very clever cat. No offense to cats, but not a very clever cat. But he kind of always ignores me. Like like he doesn't understand that I'm a human being, that I'm kind of even there. So I gave him the stare down, and then he turned to me and he goes, meow. And that was a clear communication of, look, I know you're there, but for whatever reason, you're not. I can't let you into my personal space. There's a lot. Of course, I'm reading into it, but I know what you're saying. But even that, yeah, you're right. There are clues. But again, there's also open up to. I mean, I know a Thai person who's like he's like a guru type. He said, yeah, in many tens of thousands of years ago, animals could talk. So, who knows? But no, I appreciate your contribution. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk, which is going all over the place, which is the best talks there are, right? You should go with the thoughts that you had at the time, which I enjoyed very much. You mentioned a little bit about Jataka tales, 500 and some number you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always curious, is But would have been very useful, or maybe some people have written, or maybe you are aware of. Jataka tells about his previous lives, or presumably previous lives,
Correct.
assuming you have believed in that myth. So, what? How did he get from point A when he did not know about how to awaken himself, and then he did get to that level of being awake? I mean, there are other, obviously we hear about these practices, you mentioned about Eightfold Path and all, but there are no narratives exactly what he did and, who he talked to. There are some, but I'd like to hear more that you might share some thoughts on that. But they could fall into the category of myth versus truth also, but I'm really curious about that part, which I've never gotten a good answer from anybody.
Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand your question, because you mentioned the Jataka tales, which is past life, and then you talk about the Buddha's last life, or the life we know of as Gautama, Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, and Gautama Buddha, and so there's a lot of biography in the Tripitaka of this last life, of where he was born, and his parents' names, and when his mother died. I think it was several days after he was born, maybe 7 days, and then the teachers, even the Brahmins who came and inspected his body, which was the custom at the time, to see what his destiny was going to be, and then he went off into the forest, and he lived with these great ascetics. So there's a lot of historical recording of this lifetime. But then there's the Jataka tales are, say, the previous 547 lifetimes. That's not exhaustive, because the Buddha said, he can't. He had a power apparently to recollect past lives, and it goes back so far. It's kind of almost endless. It doesn't really find a beginning. But in these chronicles, the Jataka tales, they have these stories. And the last 10, you might know, are where he's perfecting the 10 paramitas, or the perfections. So the very last one is the most famous in Thailand, which is the Vaisantara Jataka, or in Thai they say Vaisandan, Vaisandan. And that most Thais will know about, just like most Westerners will know the story of the 3 kings or whatever coming to visit baby Jesus. And so I suppose I can go on, but I didn't know if you have a more specific part of that question.
I was just trying to find out, once he left his parents and so on, and he became a nomadic or whatever he was,
Yeah.
and he met these ascetics, and you have some idea. That part I've never fully understood as to what led him, what kind of practices he did, what teachings he had. There are 2 teachers mentioned usually.
That's right.
And so on. So, are there tales on that, or there's a published version in English on that, or something like that? Because you do the translation, I thought that part, not the previous Jataka stories. Just from leaving the kingdom or whatever, wherever he was,
Yeah.
until he got to enlightenment. That part. I'm very curious. So that will tell us what he did, and maybe some guiding posts for all of us.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There isn't like one volume that's like, oh, this is the biography of the Buddha in the Tripitaka. And so I would steer you towards a book that's called The Life of the Buddha, and it's by a monk named Nyanamoli, and I think he probably passed away at least 30, 40 years ago. I believe he was British, but lived in Sri Lanka, and was a great scholar monk, but also what he did, because the biographical accounts are dispersed throughout the Tripitaka, quite amazingly spread out. And what he did is he took them and then sort of put them in a chronological order. And it's a beautifully written book, because most of it is, well, he would have translated from the Pali the actual stories that are in the Tripitaka, but I think there's like a narrator, which is him, which is the author, and so he's telling a story, and that is probably by far the finest book that I think would satisfy your curiosity.
Anyone else? I have one quick question, actually.
Sure.
Actually, kind of maybe rotate back to the previous conversation on myth. It seems to me that ghost hunters find ghosts, and Hindus that pray to some statue and cry milk, and those who worship Mary will see images of Mother Mary and these types of things. And so it almost seems like believing a myth or an ethos of some sort of myth opens up the human condition of the mind to some collapsing of potential of reality.
Collapsing?
Well, like, I mean, like a quantum state of
I see.
of how things operate, the superposition of
Oh, I can.
matter, and that the mind, potentially as a quantum processor or something like that, this
Right.
ability to say, hey, this is within the realm of probability,
Hmm.
and so it collapses into this belief system, and so we have these certain range of experiences. Because I think it's quite, for most to maybe discount some people's mystical experiences, because they absolutely happen
Right.
to individuals that encounter them, or at least their own beliefs and such. And so what do you kind of think about that from the position of the myths that you're writing about or reading? What do you feel like that's maybe opening people up to having a unique experience with the Buddhist mysticism?
Yeah, well, that is, you're also talking about miracles. From what you're describing, I think most people would say that's a miracle. And again, I think in Buddhism, there's always like, if it is part of reality, then it's part of cause and effect. So even if something miraculous, maybe we don't see how you describe it, say a quantum process or whatever, or the way mind and matter interact, and then something amazing happens that is just so unusual that we call a miracle, and then a lot of people will dispute whether it actually happened or not, and then maybe only that person who had the experience knows for themselves and can't. There's no empirical proof. I mean, in a sense, one of my favorite topics is this whole question about consciousness and how we just take it for granted. And I'm waiting for the next kind of Einstein who kind of, okay, look, it's clear. Look, if I meditate on and then that object somehow, it's like you sounds like you maybe have more understanding, where they've been able to determine like two atoms spinning, light years. There you go. And so that's a miracle to me in a way, and yet there seems to be some physical proof of that in physics. And so again, I would just say, like, I don't know what you're thinking. I can't read your mind. I can't prove to you that I can describe my mind states to you, but I assume you can't actually. I mean, there are people apparently that can read minds, but for most people that would be fantastical. That would be unbelievable that you could read someone else's mind. So your question, I think, ties in very much to what we've been talking about, and various people tonight have contributed to this discussion. And again, I would just say that there are certain narratives that the Buddha, like whether it's karma, the law of karma, rebirth, that mind, there is mind and matter, not just matter, and that the two are intertwined in some way, but can also, for practical reasons, be, so you have the five aggregates, the body and then the 4 mental factors, but as a unit, that's what makes up a human being. And there is obviously, like if you're stressed, might get a stomach ache, an ulcer. There's a relationship between mind and body very clearly. And then that there are other realms of existence. That's part of this mundane right view. I mean, these are I would just say there's suggestions. There's the inherent value of parents. That's challenging for a lot of people. Yeah, my parents abandoned me, my mother was a heroin addict, why should I have any? But I'd say what it's pointing to is a principle of gratitude. There are certain principles that it's useful. It's in most cases, it's going to be helpful. Like law of karma is a really good example. If you just think like, oh, I can just, I'm thinking of an obscenity, sorry. Just treat someone really badly, and there's not going to be any consequences. I'm going to get away with it. I'd say you're in for a reckoning. The law of karma, I really, truly believe, I mean, I've seen it myself in so often that I do have my own empirical proof, but I can't even, not enough to say, okay, categorically, look everyone, what the Buddha said is absolutely true, here's the proof. There's when you're talking about the mind, you're already getting into an area where there's going to be a lot of gray matter.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah,
Well, thank you very much for tonight. Really appreciate your time.
you're very welcome.